Greetings Internet, John here, and welcome to our first Hearthstone deck profile. The deck that I'll be discussing is the Purify Priest deck. I've been using the Purify Priest deck all throughout this season of rank. I've hit rank 5 with it, and I've been hitting about a 60% win rate with this deck, which I feel is really good with this deck considering how unpopular this deck is. According to the Tempo Storm website, which is the biggest Hearthstone website that shows all like the tier list and all the decks that are competitive in Hearthstone, considers this deck as a tier 3 deck. I honestly feel that this deck is definitely higher than a tier 3 deck, probably a tier 2 deck. Maybe not tier 1, but who knows? Maybe it is a tier 1 deck. Alright, so this is the deck list that I've been running to hit rank 5 with. It has 11 spells and 19 creatures, which I feel is pretty even. It's a nice curve too. It has some really solid early game cards, nice 2s and 3 drops. But where this deck shines is definitely in the mid game, where it can have some crazy burst potential sometimes. With my deck compared to the Tempo Storm deck, the Tempo Storm deck runs 1 Shadow Visions, which I feel is just very odd. I feel like Shadow Visions is just such a strong card in any priest deck, in my opinion. I put Draonfire Potion in this deck instead of the normal deck because I fought a lot of mid-rangey decks, and that helps a lot with board clear, wiping the board and resetting the board so you can actually, win the late game. They also run 2 Inner Fires and 2 Divine Spirits, but I only run 1 of each because I don't feel like the combo is as efficient as it would be if you ran 2, because you in the mid game you could get some dead draws if you run 2 of those. That's why I run 2 Shadow Visions, because I can get those cards if I need them with Shadow Visions.
Yeah, the great thing about Discovery is that you can kind of tailor Discovery to your situation. So if you need to catch up in the mid game, you could get a spell that maybe has some board clear, or if you're performing well, you could get a win more card that you wouldn't want otherwise.
Exactly, because you can get Shadow Visions any spell that's in your deck. So in case if your opponent is flooding the board, you can get a clutch Draonfire Potion, or if you want to finish out the game and you need an Inner Fire, you can get that from your deck as well. So let's look at the minions in this deck. For starters, we have the Northshire Cleric. Pretty solid, one of the best priest cards in the game. Helps you with card draw, gets into those cards that you need for your combo, for your early game tempo cards. Solid card, 1 mana, 1/3 too, so it's good for against aggressive decks as well. Just hold off until you get some of your cards that you really need. Ancient Watcher is one of those cards in the deck that really defines what this deck is. You play one of these and you play one of your silence cards to make it so that it can actually attack on that turn. And for the mana cost for its stats is insane. 9 stats for 2 mana is just absurd in this game. And if you're able to handle with the can attack on that text box, you can easily win games with one of these types of cards. Radiant Elemental is one of the new cards that came out in the new set, which is absolutely insane. A 2 mana 2/3 is just a solid stat line for the mana cost that it is already. On top of that, it makes it so that your spells cost 1 less. Just a crazy amount of value you can get from this card. It's basically like a Sorcerer's Apprentice for priests. Absolutely insane. And he even is an elemental and has some elemental synergy if you want to have that into your deck. Humongous Razorleaf is basically the same reason why I have Ancient Watcher. For 3 mana, having 12 stats is just ridiculous. It's just insane, and silencing that card makes it just even that more powerful. Another really good early to mid game card is the Kabal Talonpriest, a 3 mana 3/4 battle cry, give a friendly minion +3 health. It's really good if you have a minion on the board that just stuck in that first or second turn, giving that 3 health, which just makes it so that you have the board presence. One of the major things of priests' weaknesses is if they don't have a board presence, they can't do much. So having one of these cards is very crucial to making sure that you have the board control.
It also has a lot of synergy with Inner Fire.
Yes, of course. Up next, one of my favorite cards, Barnes. I know that some of you people who play this game who don't really like the RNG element in this game, but boy do I love this card in this deck. It summons a 1/1 copy of any random minion in your deck. And what's so great about that is, if you use a silence on that minion, it reverts all of the stats from what it was initially, and also makes it so that any card text is removed. So you could maybe get a Humongous Razorleaf or a Bittertide Hydra out of your Barnes and then silence it, and you get basically a free minion out of that card, which is insane value if you pull that off.
Of course, this is random number gaming. We like randomness.
Absolutely. I love randomness. Up next is Faceless Shambler, which is a great card in this deck if you have some good board presence, which this deck usually can stick on the board most of the time. It copies a friendly minion's attack and health. So you can easily pull that off. Say if you pull off a turn 3 Humongous Razorleaf, you put this on turn 4, you've got 2 4/8 minions on your field, which is really high tempo for that stage of the game. Alright, and up next is Priest of the Feast, which is a good mid-game card against some early aggressive decks, because it makes it so that the spells that you use also increase your hero's health, which is very useful against those aggressive decks. Alright, up next we have Bittertide Hydra, which is another one of those really undercosted high stat minions that has a slight downfall. Makes it so that, you know, if you takes anytime that minion takes damage, that you also take damage. But it's great because with this deck you can also silence it, and then makes it so that there is no downfall with it. It's very, very strong.
It's also it's counteracted by Priest of the Feast. So if you have Priest of the Feast out, if you drop this turn 4, drop this turn 5, you can then kind of counteract any damage that you take.
Oh yeah. Last but not least is Kabal Songstealer, which is a decent mid-game minion that silences a minion, which is what this entire deck revolves around. And now we're going to go over to the spells. So first off, we have here Silence, which is a pretty simple spell. Silences a minion. Helps with your minions that can't attack. You silence those so they're able to attack. Pretty simple. You can also use this card aggressively too against your opponent's minions and silences their buffs or death rattle minions or any sort of uses for it. Alright, and then now we have Inner Fire, which is a really good card again with your early to mid-game minions to increase their attack to push for lethal in some situations. It also has really great synergy with Divine Spirit.
And I've actually used Inner Fire in a few of my priest decks. It's a really strong card in certain situations, but I can understand why Jonathan only plays one of it. Not only do you have the potential to discover it with Shadow Visions, but there are a lot of situations where Inner Fire will fall short and be a dead card in your hand, and that's the last thing you want. In this game, the last thing you want in your hand is a dead card.
Especially if you're in top deck mode. If you top deck an Inner Fire, it's really bad.
Yeah.
Up next, we have Power Word Shield, which is pretty much a staple in any priest deck. It's just an amazing spell. It's a 1 mana, give a minion +2 health, and it recycles itself. So you pretty much can't go wrong with putting this deck in any priest deck.
Yeah, pretty much staple.
Yeah. Up next we have is Divine Spirit, double a minion's health. It's just really strong with this deck with all the really high statted minions you have. Give one of your Humongous Razorleafs double health, that's 16 health. That's huge. Pretty much no card can deal with that. Unless you have hard removal. Alright, and then we have Purify, which is the bread and butter of this deck. Silences a friendly minion and draws a card. So it recycles itself just like Power Word Shield. And it silences one of your friendly minions. It's super strong for 2 mana. You can't go wrong with it.
The Purify in Purify Priest.
Wow. Up next, we have Shadow Visions, which is definitely one of the trump cards in this deck. It just has the sheer amount of flexibility with this card is amazing. Discovering a card, you have 3 choices of the cards that you want to discover. And depending on what situation that you're in, you can get what card you need. So say if you need a silence for one of your minions, you can just get one of your silence cards, either Purify or Silence. Say if your opponent has a bunch of minions on the field and you have no way to deal with them, you can discover one of your Draonfire Potions to deal with that next turn. It's just a very flexible card, and I am just so surprised that the Tempo Storm list only has one of these in the deck for how strong it is. I just don't understand why you wouldn't put 2 of those cards in this deck. This card's insane. And then last but not least, we have Draonfire Potion, which is a tech choice that I put that the Tempo Storm doesn't have, because when I was playing the deck, I fought a lot of Hunters and Shamans, which do a lot of flooding the board, and having a board clear in my deck really helped winning games, because I would clear their board, play a big minion, and they just wouldn't be able to deal with it. So that's all the cards that we played in this deck, and now let's go on to the strategy of this deck. Alright, so basically the main idea of this deck is that you just want to try and first get your Ancient Watchers and your Humongous Razorleafs in the mulligan phase, for the most part. And then you want to try and draw your silences. Against aggressive decks, you want to probably mulligan for some of your other early game cards, like Northshire Cleric or Radiant Elemental, which are very good cards. If you get really good draws in your mulligan phase, and you get a Radiant Elemental and a Power Word Shield in both in your opening hand, you can play Radiant Elemental and Power Word Shield it on turn 2, which makes a 2/5 minion for turn 2, which is really, really strong. Some cards that you really don't want in your opening hand would be Inner Fire or Divine Spirit, because they're just some of the cards that you really want when you have minions on the field. So you want to make sure that you try and really hard mulligan for those early game minions. And some other cards also that are not really that good would be like Draonfire Potion or Faceless Shambler, since you don't really have any minions for Faceless Shambler to copy, and for Draonfire Potion is only good for certain matchups. So in your first few turns, depending on what decks you're playing, you might want to play Northshire Cleric on turn 1 against aggressive decks. If not, keep it in your opening hand for that extra card draw that you probably will need. On your turn 2s, you can play your Radiant Elementals early if you feel like it's not gonna get killed right away. Or you can play your Ancient Watcher, which is one of those cards that you really need to stick on the board really early. You can silence your Ancient Watchers on turn 2 as well, but I wouldn't recommend you doing that, because you can also use your silences pretty aggressively against your opponents. So I would keep that just in case of whatever your opponent is doing. Sometimes your opponents might even kill the Ancient Watcher before you use your silence, so then you just have a silence in your hand in case of, emergencies. Turn 3, you probably most likely want to drop down your Humongous Razorleaf, just again having that really strong tempo play against your opponent. Keeping that silence as well with those minions is just really good. Kabal Talonpriest is another really good turn 3 drop. Say if you have a Radiant Elemental or a Cleric on your field, drop that down, give them 3 extra health, and they'll probably just stick on the board forever, unless your opponent uses a lot of resources against them. Then you have all these other minions that they have to deal with. Barnes is another really good turn 4 play. If you have a 0 mana silence in your hand, Barnes can be really insane, because then you can just, on turn 4, play Barnes, and then silence that 1/1 minion, and then you basically have a free minion. Faceless Shambler is really good on turn 4 if you have the Humongous Razorleaf that you played on turn 3. Just makes just another really high tempo minion on the field. Makes it just really, really strong. Depending on if you're facing some aggressive decks as well, Priest of the Feast might be a good 4-drop, because then it makes it so that your opponent needs to kill it. Otherwise, you're just going to gain all that health back that they done to you. Now that we're getting into the mid-game, some of the combos that you can pull off with like Divine Spirits and Inner Fires. If some of your minions stuck on the field like Humongous Razorleaf or Faceless Shambler, you give that double health and then increase its attack to its health. You have a 16/16 minion on the field on like turn 5, which is just insane. The amount of value that you have is just crazy. Kabal Songstealer is also a really good, solid 5 mana minion. That makes it so that you have just a, solid minion on the field that you play it. You could silence one of your minions or silence one of your opponent's minions in case they have a buff minion or a death rattle minion or something like that. Bittertide Hydra, depending on what kind of decks you're facing, is another really good 5 cost drop. It's just a huge stat line for the cost it is, and most opponents won't be able to deal with it when it's played, and you can just run over your opponent that early on with this kind of card. So basically, what this deck tries to do is it tries to just stick on the board really early with really big minions and pull off combos with your silences, and make it so that you can just give one of your minions a ridiculous amount of health, and then increasing his attack equal to its health to just completely destroy your opponent in one turn. Just this crazy combo that you can pull off. Shadow Visions makes it so that you can get some of your combo pieces earlier on, and you can just pull off that win. One big deck that is out there in the meta right now is Taunt Warrior, so there's a lot of taunt minions out in the game right now. And what's really good against taunt minions, against, say you have like a really ridiculously big statted minion on your field, silence is a pretty good thing against taunt minions, because then they don't have taunt, and then you can just go to your opponent's face and kill them. Alright, so this is the deck profile, guys. I love this deck because it's such a unique deck compared to most other decks. Being able to use silence proactively with your minions is just super awesome. The way that, how unique that is just why I love this deck. A few other decks that I have my eye on right now is like a mid-rangey paladin deck that has been kind of like dominating the meta right now. I'm not quite sure if I want to do that right now, but we'll see. Another deck is Taunt Warrior, which is another deck that I want to do. I just really like those mid-rangey control decks. I'm not a big aggro fan, so if I see kind of a deck that really suits my style, I'm going to gravitate towards that. So like Taunt Warrior, it just plays a bunch of taunt minions, and it also plays the quest. We'll get into that a little later. So that's it, guys.
Alright, thanks everyone for joining us. Hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more Hearthstone deck profile videos. Little Johnny here, this was his first deck profile video, so thank you all for joining and listening in, and of course we're going to improve these videos over time.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.